Hey, this is Joe from the Recording Revolution. Today we're going to explore and listen to my favorite EQ move, and we'll talk about how it can help your mixes or destroy them if you're not careful. But first, if you love to mix, or maybe you want to love to mix, but you find the whole process a little bit mysterious and frustrating, you probably don't have a system that tells you where you are in the mix and where to go next. Installing a system like this into your workflow will transform the way that you mix. It'll help you get incredible mixes, better mixes than you've ever gotten, and you'll also be mixing faster and having a lot more fun. I've got a guide that will show you how to do this. It's called the 5-Step Mix Guide. You can have it as my gift, absolutely free. Just go to recordingrevolution.com/5stepmix. All right, let's dive in. Before I tell you my favorite EQ move, let's real quickly get on the same page about what EQ is. An EQ is just a collection of filters. And a filter is a device that allows you to target or filter a specific group of frequencies and then do something to them. So we can take this group of frequencies and we can boost them or we can cut them. In a typical parametric EQ, in addition to having the frequency control left to right, the boost or cut control up and down, you also typically have a width control. A lot of times this is called Q. The letter Q stands for quality. It's some sort of formula, but all you need to know is Q means width. And as you turn that number up, the width of your EQ curve gets a lot narrower. So if we have an EQ here and we cut it by 10 dB and then we change the width to the really high number, as high as it'll go, that EQ curve looks like this. And this, my friend, is my favorite EQ move. It's called a notch filter. It takes a specific, very limited range of frequencies and cuts them out. Now, why would we use this? Where does it make sense? We're going to talk about that, but this is it right here, my favorite EQ move. Why would we focus on such a small group of frequencies? What difference could it possibly make? Well, if you've done any amount of recording, you know that audio waves are weird. They do weird things that you just can't predict sometimes. And sometimes that means certain very specific frequencies stand out. And they're too loud and they're just kind of resonating or ringing. And this notch allows us to say, hey, you, sit down. You're too loud. There are two main areas where I will use notch filters quite a bit. The first is a ringing snare drum. The second is a piercing vocal. Let's listen to those and I'll show you exactly how it works. So here is a snare drum recorded in this room a few months ago. Overall, I love the sound of this snare, but there is quite a bit of ring. Now, one solution is you can kind of team up with your drummer and try to put dampening on the head of the drum itself. That will take care of a lot of those ringing notes that are ringing. The problem is that I almost never like the sound as much when it's been dampened. My drummer buddy Tim and I have talked about over the years how we kind of just want to let the snare be a snare and ring and have all these overtones and all this great goodness. We can always notch some of that out if it's too much in the mix, but you can't really bring it back if you muffle it at the source. It's kind of a weird version of get it right at the source, but specifically knowing that we can take these specific frequencies and bring them down. So let's just see, what does this EQ look like when we play that snare? So we can see there's a couple of jumps here, but specifically it can be really helpful if you can kind of hear or sing the notes that are problematic. And then there's some, what's it called, harmonics above that. So there's, and then there's, so specific notes don't really matter. We can see here where it falls on the scale of a piano, which is kind of fun. But realistically, it's just knowing what the sound is I'm going for. And then what I'll do is take an EQ and I'll boost it and I'll make it very narrow. And I can do that by scrolling in Studio One here with the Pro EQ. And then I'll go find the main primary frequency that's kind of being a jerk. So the important thing here is the notch is, right now we're just finding that frequency, and that frequency is super consistent. That's where notches really thrive, where there's something in the sound that's consistently boosted, a specific kind of narrow group of frequencies. So we can target those with this notch and we can pull them down. Here's what that sounds like. And now that we've done that, we can decide, does that next harmonic need to come down as well? Let's try it. That's the frequency. There it is. So that's at 914 hertz, which, if I had to guess, is some sort of a harmonic of this one. Is that double? No, it's not. But anyway, so let's pull that one down and see what it sounds like. Now, here's where it gets interesting. As we pull things down, we're going to hear other frequencies ringing. It's important to not go nuts here. I really just want to take care of the first or second frequency that's a problem, and then kind of tell myself to quit, because if we pull back into the overall drum mix, first of all, let's hear what it sounds like with and without these two notches. Much more of a natural sound. Now, there's other things we can hear, and you can go nuts finding all of them and pulling them down. We don't want to pull down all the frequencies. That's called silence. What we want to do is just take those ones that are a little too loud and pull them down. So now our drum mix has a nice evenness to it. You can really hear it in that drum mix that is ringing out on the snare when I turn that EQ off. That frequency. So we've taken care of that with the EQ. So that's the first example. Second example is on a vocal, especially a vocal where there's a lot of kind of aggressive singing. For me, it gets nasally and it gets weird. So here is the vocal. Let's just listen to just the main vocal here on the chorus. Breaking down on the breakaway, always the last to go. The takeaway is it's over. So that's the mixed vocal. If we turn everything off, here's what the raw vocal sounded like. Breaking down on the breakaway, breaking down on the breakaway. Always the last to go. So there's a little bit of a up in like the upper mid-range. And this is actually the EQ that I used on this mix. It was up around 2.8K. And here's what that sounds like, boosted. Breaking down on the breakaway. It's gross, right? If we just listen to the raw vocal without the EQ on, it sounds like this. Breaking down on the breakaway. Now listen for that. Breaking down on the... Now listen for that frequency coming out in the vocal. Breaking down on the breakaway, always the last to go. It's mostly on certain like vowel sounds, but it's fairly consistent. So by turning it down, we get rid of those little peaks that jump out and hurt our ears, but we don't actually hurt the vocal in any other way. It's a very specific set of frequencies that just makes the vocal sound smoother. So here it is without the EQ, then I'll turn it on. Breaking down on the breakaway. Breaking down on the breakaway. It's pretty subtle, but it's this kind of ness that just gets put away. And it's a lot easier to listen to, and especially on like earbuds, AirPods, those frequencies seem to be a little more pronounced, and the vocal will sound just nasty on those. This is a wonderful smoothing device, in addition to all the other things, compression and whatever else. But this kind of takes that out so that the vocal can sit on top without any of those weird frequencies jumping out and being too loud. Real quickly, let's talk about how notches can be harmful rather than helpful. As you saw, when I cut the two spots on the snare drum, there were more frequencies that I could hear. It's kind of like whack-a-mole. We knock one frequency down, now we can hear other frequencies. So you have to be careful not to just go hunting for every single possible bad sounding frequency. Newsflash, if you take an EQ and boost it like that and just sweep around a track, every frequency you find will sound bad. So if you're just looking for bad things, you'll just turn down everything. That's not the point. You need to know roughly what you're trying to solve. What problem are you trying to solve before you start sweeping around with EQ? Then you can at least hone it in on a specific area and then go find that ooh, 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 that was ringing in the snare drum, and now you can pull it down. But if you just boost and sweep, you're going to end up cutting, have 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 notches on your track because all of those frequencies sounded bad to you. It's going to sound bad because a narrow boost sounds terrible no matter where you do it. Remember why you're doing it, and a good rule of thumb is try not to have more than 2 notches on a track. Do I have more than 2 on occasion? Sure. But when I get to that third one, I really start to kind of step back and say, okay, am I making it better, or have I just changed the sound so much that it's actually worse now? So try to have a little bit of restraint when you use these, but don't be afraid to go real narrow and real deep with those notches, because sometimes those frequencies are just ruthless and you got to just kind of knock them down. Listen, talking about EQ is really fun, but I can't tell you how many people I've helped who thought they had an EQ problem when they actually just had a volume problem. So they're over here wrestling with EQ to get this bass guitar to sit right in the mix, when in reality, all they needed to do was turn it down. Problems like that don't happen nearly as often when you follow my 5-step mix process, because the first part of the process is heavily focused on balance and levels. When you get those levels balanced, guess what? Suddenly you're not having to use dramatic EQ. You can use just a notch here and there. There are some times where I don't even use EQ on my guitars, for example, because when they sit right in the mix, it's kind of like magic and everything comes together. It's hard to learn that. It's hard to not just jump in and start adding plugins, but I promise it's super helpful. I can teach you that process for free. Just go to recordingrevolution.com/5-step mix to pick up your copy of my 5-step mix guide. Thanks so much for watching. I'll see you in the next one.